Deep in the Cascade Mountains, Daniel Cooper never expected his morning hike to change his life forever. When he heard desperate cries echoing through the pine trees, he discovered Arthur Whitmore, an elderly man trapped beneath a fallen branch with a badly injured leg. Daniel spent hours carefully freeing the stranger and helping him to safety, refusing any talk of reward. 3 weeks later, a lawyer appeared at Daniel's apartment with stunning news. Arthur had passed away peacefully, leaving his entire estate to the young man who saved his life. The inheritance included a remote mountain cabin, substantial financial assets, and something far more mysterious. When Daniel visited the property, he found journals spanning decades, hand-drawn maps of hidden locations, and a locked vault containing secrets that Arthur had protected his entire life. But what was Arthur really guarding? And why did he choose Daniel to inherit this burden? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The knock came on a Tuesday morning when Daniel was struggling through his third cup of coffee, trying to focus on the freelance graphic design project that would barely cover his rent. Through the peephole, he saw a woman in an expensive charcoal suit holding a leather briefcase, her silver hair pulled back in a precise bun. "Mr. Cooper, I'm Margaret Chen from Chen & Associates. I represent the estate of Arthur Whitmore." Daniel's stomach dropped. He'd been thinking about the old man every day since the rescue, wondering if his injured leg had healed properly. The lawyer's formal tone suggested this wasn't a social call. "Please, come in." Daniel cleared newspapers and sketches from his small dining table. Is he all right?" Margaret Chen settled into the offered chair with the careful movements of someone who delivered difficult news professionally. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick manila folder. "I'm afraid Mr. Whitmore passed away peacefully in his sleep 10 days ago. Heart failure, according to his physician. He was 87. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He'd only spent a few hours with Arthur, but something about the old man's quiet dignity and sharp intelligence had left a lasting impression. "I'm sorry to hear that. He seemed like a good man." He was indeed. "Which brings me to why I'm here." Margaret withdrew a document bound in dark blue leather. "Mr. Whitmore's last will and testament contains some unusual provisions, Mr. Cooper. He has named you as his primary beneficiary." Daniel stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "You are the sole inheritor of Arthur Whitmore's estate. His property, financial assets, and all personal effects now belong to you." "That's impossible. I barely knew him. We spent maybe 4 hours together, and most of that was me helping him walk down a mountain trail." Margaret opened the will, pointing to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. Mr. Whitmore was quite specific. He wrote, "To Daniel Cooper, who showed kindness to a stranger without expectation of reward, who demonstrated patience and compassion in difficult circumstances, and who refused payment for basic human decency. He has proven himself worthy of carrying forward what I have protected." Daniel read the passage twice, his hands trembling slightly. "Carrying forward what he protected? What does that mean?" "I was hoping you might know. Mr. Whitmore left very specific instructions about the transfer of his assets, but he was deliberately vague about their nature." Margaret pulled out a property deed and several financial statements. "The estate includes a cabin on 47 acres in the Cascade National Forest, various investment accounts totaling approximately $2.3 million, and what he referred to as the collection." The numbers made Daniel dizzy. He lived paycheck to paycheck, sometimes choosing between groceries and utilities. The inheritance was more money than he'd imagined possessing in his lifetime. There must be some mistake. Why would he leave all this to a complete stranger? "According to his personal notes, you weren't a stranger, Mr. Cooper. He'd been observing you for several months before your encounter on the trail." "Observing me? That sounds—" Daniel paused, trying to process the implications. "That sounds like stalking." Margaret's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Whitmore was a very careful man. He needed to be certain about his choice of successor. His notes indicate he considered several candidates before settling on you. Successor to what? That's something you'll need to discover for yourself. Mr. Whitmore left detailed instructions that I'm not privy to. All I can tell you is that accepting this inheritance comes with certain responsibilities. Margaret placed a set of keys on the table beside the documents. The cabin key is brass, the others are for various locks on the property. Mr. Whitmore suggested you visit the cabin before making any decisions about the inheritance. What if I don't want it? What if I refuse? Then the estate goes to the National Historical Preservation Society with instructions to seal the cabin for 50 years. Mr. Whitmore was very clear that the choice must be yours. But he believed you would understand the importance of what he's passing on once you see it for yourself. Daniel picked up the brass key, feeling its unusual weight. It was intricately carved with symbols he didn't recognize, not quite Celtic, not quite Native American, but definitely meaningful. How long do I have to decide? There's no deadline, but I'd recommend visiting the property soon. Mr. Whitmore indicated that time might be a factor, though he didn't explain why. After Margaret left, Daniel sat in his apartment staring at the keys and documents spread across his table. Arthur Whitmore's walking stick leaned against the wall where Daniel had placed it after helping the old man to his car 3 weeks ago. Arthur had insisted Daniel keep it, saying it might be useful someday. Now, examining the carved wooden cane more closely, Daniel noticed the same mysterious symbols that decorated the brass key. Whatever Arthur had been protecting, it was clearly more complex than a simple inheritance. The drive to Arthur's property took Daniel through winding mountain roads that seemed to lead away from civilization with each mile. His GPS signal faded 20 minutes before he reached the turnoff, forcing him to rely on Margaret Chen's hand-drawn directions and his own sense of direction. The cabin appeared suddenly around a bend in the narrow gravel road, nestled against a backdrop of towering Douglas firs. It was larger than Daniel had expected. Not the rustic hunting lodge he'd imagined, but a substantial log structure with multiple levels built into the mountainside. Solar panels gleamed on the metal roof, and a generator hummed quietly behind the building. Daniel parked beside a well-maintained pickup truck and approached the front door, brass key in hand. The porch wrapped around the entire visible side of the cabin, furnished with comfortable chairs and a small table, where Arthur must have spent many mornings watching the sunrise over the valley below. The key turned smoothly, and Daniel stepped into what felt like another world. The main room featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the forest, comfortable leather furniture arranged around a massive stone fireplace, and walls lined with bookshelves that reached to the cathedral ceiling. But it was the sheer organization of everything that struck him most powerfully. Every book was carefully catalogued with small numbered tags. Filing cabinets lined one entire wall, each drawer labeled with dates and geographical locations. A large oak desk dominated the far corner, its surface clear except for a single leather-bound journal and what appeared to be a hand-drawn map spread beneath a sheet of protective glass. Daniel approached the desk with the reverence of someone entering a sacred space. The map was incredibly detailed, showing the local mountain region with far more precision than any commercial topographical chart. Red circles marked specific locations, connected by carefully drawn lines that suggested routes or relationships between the sites. Cryptic notations in Arthur's precise handwriting covered the margins. Cache 7, relocated 1987. Northern approach, compromised. Emergency Protocol C. The leather journal beside the map bore Arthur's name embossed in gold lettering. Daniel opened it carefully, finding pages filled with the same precise handwriting he'd seen on the map. The first entry was dated just 2 weeks ago, 3 days before their encounter on the mountain trail. Final preparations complete. The successor has been chosen and tested repeatedly. Daniel Cooper demonstrates the necessary qualities: integrity, resourcefulness, and most importantly, the ability to act without expectation of personal gain. If he is reading this, then my assessment was correct, and the transition can proceed. Daniel sank into Arthur's desk chair, his hands trembling slightly as he turned the page. Arthur had been planning this inheritance for months, possibly years. Their meeting on the trail hadn't been coincidence. It had been an elaborate test. Exploring the rest of the cabin only deepened the mystery. A second room contained more filing cabinets and what appeared to be a small laboratory with equipment for testing metals and examining documents. Magnifying glasses, chemical solutions, and precision scales suggested someone who authenticated valuable objects. The kitchen was modern and well-stocked, clearly designed for extended stays. But it was the basement that took Daniel's breath away. Descending the wooden stairs, he found himself in a climate-controlled vault that extended much deeper into the mountain than the cabin's footprint suggested. Metal shelving lined the walls, holding hundreds of carefully labeled boxes and containers. Temperature and humidity gauges monitored the environment, and multiple security systems blinked silently in the dim light. At the center of the vault stood a massive safe, its steel door nearly 6 feet tall and reinforced with what looked like military-grade hardware. No combination lock or keypad was visible, just a series of small holes that suggested some kind of specialized key or mechanism. Daniel spent the next hour exploring the basement's contents. Many of the boxes contained photographs, black and white images of artwork, documents, and artifacts that looked valuable and historically significant. Others held what appeared to be authentication records, proving the provenance and legitimacy of various items. One box labeled Correspondence 1952-2019 contained letters in multiple languages, many bearing official government letterheads from countries around the world. Another held detailed maps of locations across Europe, each marked with coordinates and coded notations similar to those on the desk upstairs. As afternoon sunlight slanted through the cabin's windows, Daniel found himself overwhelmed by the scope of what he'd inherited. This wasn't just a mountain retreat, it was the headquarters of some kind of operation that had been running for decades. Arthur Whitmore hadn't been a simple retiree enjoying his golden years in the mountains. He'd been protecting something, coordinating something, preserving something that required this level of security and organization. The walking stick Arthur had insisted Daniel keep suddenly felt heavier in his hands. Its carved symbols now seemed less decorative and more purposeful, possibly a key to understanding the larger mystery Arthur had left behind. Standing in that vault surrounded by decades of careful documentation, Daniel realized that accepting this inheritance meant accepting responsibility for whatever Arthur had been protecting. The question was whether he had the courage to discover what that might be. Daniel returned to the cabin the next morning with coffee and sandwiches, determined to understand what Arthur had left him. He'd spent a sleepless night wondering about the vault, the maps, and the careful organization that suggested decades of purposeful work. The filing cabinets yielded their secrets reluctantly. Everything was meticulously organized by date and location, but the contents seemed designed to tell a story only to someone who understood the larger context. Daniel selected the earliest file cabinet, labeled Personal Records 1950 to 1955, and withdrew the first leather-bound journal. Arthur's handwriting was precise even as a young man. The first entry, dated June 15, 1952, began with the enthusiasm of someone embarking on an adventure. Graduated from the University of Washington today with degrees in cartography and art history. Professor Morrison recommended me for a position with the U.S. State Department's Cultural Recovery Division. The work involves tracking and recovering cultural artifacts displaced during the war. I never imagined my love of maps and history could serve such an important purpose. Daniel settled into Arthur's reading chair by the window, captivated by the young man's voice emerging from decades-old pages. The early entries detailed Arthur's training in Washington, D.C., where he learned document authentication, artifact evaluation, and what the journal referred to as Cultural Preservation Protocols. By autumn 1952, Arthur's work had taken a more serious tone. Assigned to European Recovery Team 7 under Director Harrison Blake, our mission: locate and secure cultural treasures stolen by Nazi forces during the occupation. Many pieces remain missing, hidden in locations known only to officers who died in the war's final days. The department believes scattered documentation and survivor testimony can lead us to these caches. The journal revealed Arthur's transformation from eager graduate to seasoned investigator. Entry after entry documented his travels across post-war Europe, interviewing elderly witnesses, examining bombed buildings, and piecing together the complex web of Nazi cultural theft. A loose photograph, tucked between pages, showed Arthur as a young man standing beside a middle-aged woman in a displaced persons camp. His journal entry for that day explained, "Met Rosa Zimmermann today, a concentration camp survivor who worked as a translator for Nazi officers in Austria. She remembers specific conversations about hiding artwork in mountain caves. Her memory for detail is remarkable. She can describe paintings she saw only briefly 60 years ago. She agreed to help us locate the cache near Salzburg." Daniel studied the photograph, seeing in young Arthur's face the same quiet determination he'd witnessed during their brief encounter on the mountain trail. But there was something else in the young man's expression, a sense of purpose that suggested he understood the magnitude of what he was attempting. The journal entries became more complex as Arthur's expertise grew. Technical descriptions of authentication processes mixed with personal observations about the people he met and the places he visited. By 1953, his role had expanded beyond simple recovery. Director Blake explained the larger mission today. "We're not just recovering stolen art, we're establishing a network to protect these treasures permanently. Some pieces are too valuable or too sensitive to return to public museums. They need guardians, people who will ensure they survive whatever political upheavals the future might bring." This was Daniel's first glimpse of the organization Arthur would serve for the rest of his life. The journal described a careful selection process for potential guardians, extensive background investigations, and training in security protocols that seemed remarkably sophisticated for the 1950s. One entry particularly caught Daniel's attention. The psychological evaluation revealed interesting insights about what makes an effective guardian. It's not expertise in art history or even physical courage that matters most. The essential quality is the ability to put long-term preservation above personal gain. Too many people see valuable artifacts and think about ownership or profit. Guardians must think about legacy and responsibility. As afternoon light faded outside the cabin windows, Daniel found himself completely absorbed in Arthur's early career. The young cartographer's gradual introduction to a secret world of cultural preservation felt like reading an adventure novel, except the stakes were real and the consequences permanent. The final entry in the 1952 journal hinted at even greater mysteries ahead. "Received word that Team 7 has been selected for the Munich operation. Director Blake says this mission will determine whether I'm ready for full Guardian status. If successful, I'll be assigned my own territory and given responsibility for protecting whatever we recover." The weight of that responsibility feels both thrilling and terrifying. Daniel closed the journal as darkness settled over the mountain forest. Arthur's walking stick leaned against the chair beside him, its carved symbols now seeming less mysterious and more purposeful. This wasn't just a family heirloom or hiking aid. It was likely a symbol of Arthur's status within the Guardian organization. Sitting in Arthur's chair, surrounded by decades of carefully preserved history, Daniel began to understand why the old man had chosen him so carefully. Being a guardian wasn't just about protecting valuable objects. It was about becoming part of something larger than oneself, something that connected past and future through the dedication of people willing to serve without recognition or reward. The second journal chronicled Arthur's involvement in what he called the Munich operation. Daniel found himself reading late into the night, captivated by accounts of post-war Europe and the complex task of recovering cultural treasures from Nazi hiding places. The journal's most significant entry was dated March 8, 1953, accompanied by a fragment of German documentation that Arthur had carefully preserved between the pages. The torn piece of paper bore Nazi letterhead and what appeared to be coordinates, along with crude drawings of religious symbols and treasure chests. "Today, we achieved the breakthrough Director Blake hoped for," Arthur had written. "Rosa Zimmerman's memory led us to the correct valley, and our investigation of the cave system yielded extraordinary results. Hidden behind a carefully constructed false wall, we discovered what may be the largest cache of stolen religious artifacts recovered to date." Arthur's description of the discovery read like something from an adventure novel, but his precise documentation and the physical evidence tucked into the journal proved its authenticity. The Nazi fragment showed coordinates that Arthur had verified against modern topographical maps, confirming the location of what his team designated as Cache Alpha 7. The inventory is staggering. 14th-century illuminated manuscripts from French monasteries, golden chalices and religious vessels from Polish churches, carved wooden altarpieces from German cathedrals. Each piece represents not just artistic value, but the spiritual heritage of communities destroyed by war. The responsibility of protecting these items feels overwhelming. Daniel studied the Nazi document fragment, noting how the hasty German handwriting suggested urgent concealment. Someone had been racing against time, possibly as Allied forces approached, to hide treasures that represented decades of systematic looting. Arthur's journal detailed the careful process of documenting and securing the recovered items. Each artifact was photographed, catalogued, and evaluated for historical significance. But rather than returning everything to museums, the Guardian organization made difficult decisions about which pieces required special protection. Director Blake explained the logic today. Public display makes valuable artifacts vulnerable to theft, political upheaval, and war. Some treasures are safer hidden, protected by people who understand their true value, extends beyond monetary worth. We are not hiding these items from the world. We are preserving them for a world that may not yet be ready to protect them properly. The journal revealed Arthur's growing expertise in authentication and preservation. He learned to identify forgeries, understand the chemical processes that could damage ancient materials, and develop security protocols that would protect treasures for decades or centuries. One particularly detailed entry described Arthur's first assignment as a full guardian, assigned to protect Cache Alpha 7 and establish secure storage in the Pacific Northwest region. The location must be remote enough to avoid discovery, but accessible enough for proper maintenance and monitoring. Director Blake emphasized that I may be the only person who knows this cache's location for many years, possibly decades. This explained Arthur's eventual move to the Cascade Mountains. His isolated cabin wasn't a retreat from the world. It was a carefully chosen headquarters for protecting some of history's most valuable cultural treasures. The journal also introduced Arthur to other guardians, revealing a network that spanned continents. Met Elena Rodriguez today, guardian for Central American artifacts recovered from private collectors who acquired them through questionable means. Her territory includes pieces dating back to Mayan and Aztec civilizations. The scope of our organization's responsibility is truly global. Arthur's personal reflections showed the psychological toll of guardian work. Living with such secrets creates a unique form of isolation. I cannot share the most meaningful aspects of my work with family or friends. The loneliness is sometimes overwhelming, but the importance of the mission makes personal sacrifice necessary. As Daniel read these entries, he began understanding why Arthur had been so careful in selecting his successor. Guardian work required not just integrity and discretion, but the emotional strength to carry enormous responsibility largely alone. The journal's final entries from 1953 hinted at challenges ahead. Intelligence reports suggest criminal organizations are becoming aware of Guardian operations. Former Nazi officers and their descendants are actively searching for caches they believe rightfully belong to them. We may need to upgrade security protocols and prepare for more direct threats. This warning proved prophetic, as later journals would reveal. But for now, Daniel focused on understanding Arthur's early years as a Guardian and the principles that guided the organization. The Nazi document fragment felt heavy in Daniel's hands as he considered its implications. This torn piece of paper represented one thread in a vast web of cultural theft and recovery that had shaped Arthur's entire adult life. Now somehow, Daniel had become responsible for continuing that work. Outside the cabin windows, dawn was breaking over the mountain peaks. Daniel realized he'd been reading all night, completely absorbed in Arthur's story. The walking stick beside his chair seemed to pulse with new significance, not just a hiking aid, but a symbol of guardianship that connected him to a legacy of people who'd sacrificed personal comfort to preserve humanity's cultural heritage. Daniel's third day at the cabin began with the discovery of Arthur's communication equipment. Hidden behind a false panel in the basement, he found a sophisticated radio system that looked decades old but appeared to be meticulously maintained. Vacuum tubes glowed softly when he activated the power switch, and the device immediately began receiving coded transmissions. The 1965 journal explained the radio's significance. Received my permanent communication device today. Model CR7, specially modified for Guardian network operations. Director Blake emphasized that this radio represents my lifeline to other Guardians and headquarters. All transmissions are coded using rotating cipher keys that change monthly. Arthur had documented the Guardian network's communication protocols in fascinating detail. Each Guardian received a unique call sign based on their geographical region and specialization. Arthur was Cascade 7, indicating his responsibility for the 7th major cache in the Cascade Mountain region. Other call signs mentioned in his journals included Alpine 3, Swiss Guardian, Desert 12, Southwest American Guardian, and Coastal 9, California Guardian. The radio crackled with static as Daniel experimented with its controls. Suddenly a clear voice emerged. Any station, this is Alpine 3, requesting status update on Cascade 7. Arthur missed his scheduled check-in yesterday. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for the microphone. Someone was looking for Arthur, someone who didn't know about his death. The Guardian network was still active, still functioning, still expecting Arthur to fulfill his responsibilities. Arthur's journal detailed the network's organizational structure. Learn today that our organization operates on cellular principles. Each Guardian knows only a few others directly, protecting the network if any individual is compromised. Regional coordinators like myself maintain contact with 5 to 7 other Guardians, while headquarters coordinates the larger strategic picture. The communication logs revealed the scope of Guardian operations worldwide. Monthly status reports documented the security of hidden caches, threats from criminal organizations, and occasional transfers of artifacts between Guardians when political situations made certain locations unsafe. One particularly interesting log entry from 1967 described a major operation. Received emergency transmission from Desert 12. Political. Unrest in Mexico has compromised cache. Emperador, Elena Rodriguez requests assistance, relocating 14 pre-Columbian artifacts to secure storage. Arranged transfer through Coastal 9's territory. Operation successful. Items now secured in backup location. Daniel realized he was reading about a sophisticated international network that had been protecting cultural treasures for decades. The Guardians weren't just individual collectors. They formed an organized system capable of responding to threats and adapting to changing circumstances. Arthur's personal reflections revealed the emotional complexity of guardian work. 20 years of isolation takes its toll. The radio provides connection to people who understand the mission, but we can never meet in person, except during emergencies. I know Alpine 3's voice better than those of my own neighbors. Yet I've never seen his face. The journal described the careful vetting process for new guardians. Received word that Guardian 15 died unexpectedly in Spain. Headquarters has identified 3 potential successors, all being discreetly evaluated for the necessary psychological qualities. The selection process can take years. We cannot afford mistakes. This explained Arthur's extended observation of Daniel. Guardian selection wasn't casual. It required comprehensive assessment of character, integrity, and emotional stability. Arthur had been watching Daniel for months, creating situations to test his responses under pressure. The radio suddenly came alive with multiple voices. Alpine 3 to all stations. We have a security breach. Cache A12 has been compromised. Repeat, Cache A12 is compromised. Unknown individuals attempted forced entry 2 nights ago. Daniel listened with growing alarm as guardians across the network reported similar incidents. Someone was systematically targeting guardian locations, using sophisticated intelligence to locate caches that had remained hidden for decades. Coastal 9 to all stations, another voice reported. Guardian Martinez found surveillance equipment near her location. Professional grade, not amateur treasure hunters. This appears to be an organized operation. Arthur's final journal entries suddenly made terrible sense. His recent concerns about security, his urgency in selecting a successor, his elaborate testing of Daniel. Arthur had known something was coming. A coded message in the journal's back cover provided Daniel with Arthur's authentication codes and emergency protocols. If he chose to accept his role as Cascade 7, he could establish contact with the network and learn about the current threat, but accepting meant entering a world of secrets and isolation that had consumed Arthur's entire adult life. It meant becoming responsible for treasures that criminal organizations would kill to possess. It meant carrying knowledge that could never be shared with family or friends. The radio continued its stream of alarming reports as Daniel sat in Arthur's basement, surrounded by decades of careful documentation. The walking stick leaned against the radio table, its carved symbols now clearly marking it as a guardian's badge of office. Outside, wind moved through the forest with a sound like whispered warnings. The network needed Cascade 7 to respond, to confirm the security of Arthur's cache, to take his place in a battle that had been raging quietly for generations. Daniel reached for the microphone, then hesitated. Once he spoke, there would be no going back. Daniel finally picked up the microphone, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Alpine 3, this is Cascade 7. Arthur Whitmore passed away 10 days ago. I am his designated successor. The radio fell silent for a long moment before Alpine 3 responded, Cascade 7, please authenticate using current monthly code. Daniel fumbled through Arthur's documentation until he found the authentication sequence. After confirming his identity, the network exploded with questions and condolences. Arthur had been a respected senior guardian, and his death left a significant gap in the Pacific Northwest Territory. Moving to Arthur's most recent journals, Daniel found entries that explained the current crisis. A newspaper clipping from 6 months ago served as a stark warning about the threats facing the Guardian network. The Seattle Times article described the mysterious disappearance of several valuable artifacts from private collections. But Arthur's handwritten notes in the margins revealed the true scope of the problem. Third major theft this year, targeting items known to be in Guardian protection, Arthur had written. Pattern suggests inside knowledge of our operations. Someone is systematically hunting our caches. The newspaper article mentioned the theft of a 15th century Byzantine icon from a private collector in Oregon. But Arthur's notes identified the victim as Guardian. Coastal 9, the thieves had used sophisticated equipment to bypass security systems that had protected the artifact for 40 years. Arthur's recent entries painted a picture of an organization under siege. Received coded transmission from Elena Rodriguez, Desert 12, yesterday. Her backup location in Nevada was burglarized last week. Professional job. They knew exactly where to look and what to take. This is not random treasure hunting. Daniel studied Arthur's analysis of the threats. The old Guardian had been tracking patterns in the attacks, noting similarities in equipment, timing, and target selection that suggested a single organized group, rather than multiple opportunistic thieves. Most disturbing development, the thieves seem to know our authentication codes and communication protocols. Either they have inside information or they've broken our cipher system. Must assume all radio transmissions are being monitored. This explained why Arthur had been working so urgently to identify a successor. He'd known the network was compromised and that his own location might be discovered. The elaborate testing of Daniel hadn't just been about finding a worthy guardian. It had been about preparing for imminent danger. Arthur's final entries revealed his desperate attempts to protect. Gash Alpha 7 relocated the most valuable pieces to emergency storage sites. If they find the main vault, they'll discover only duplicates and less significant items. The real treasures are hidden using protocols known only to senior guardians. Daniel realized that the massive safe in the basement might be a decoy. Arthur had been clever enough to mislead potential thieves while maintaining the appearance of normal Guardian operations. The journal also revealed Arthur's growing isolation from the network. Can no longer trust standard communication channels. If someone is monitoring our transmissions, even coded messages put other Guardians at risk. Have switched to emergency protocols and physical courier system for critical information. This explained why Alpine 3 hadn't heard from Arthur recently. The old Guardian had been protecting the network by maintaining radio silence while preparing for the worst-case scenario. Arthur's investigation had identified several suspicious incidents. Missing persons reports for Guardians who'd stopped responding to radio calls. Unusually detailed inquiries about historical artifacts from people with questionable credentials. And surveillance reports from Guardians who'd noticed strangers watching their properties. The evidence points to an organization with substantial resources and inside knowledge of our operations. They're not just stealing artifacts, they're dismantling our entire network systematically. Most troubling was Arthur's theory about the attacker's identity. Pattern analysis suggests involvement by descendants of original Nazi officers. Many families never accepted the loss of their treasures and have spent generations planning recovery operations. They would have access to original documentation about cache locations and some understanding of our organizational structure. The newspaper clipping included a small photograph of the stolen Byzantine icon, but Arthur had circled a man in the background of the image. His note read, Klaus Brenner, grandson of SS Oberfuhrer Heinrich Brenner, who supervised cultural theft operations in Eastern Europe. Confirmed presence at 3 theft locations. This is our primary suspect. Daniel felt a chill as he realized the implications. This wasn't just about money or criminal opportunism. It was about completing a mission that had begun during World War II. The Nazi cultural theft program was still active, now led by a new generation seeking to reclaim what they considered their inheritance. Arthur's final entry was dated 3 days before their encounter on the mountain trail. Klaus Brenner has been spotted in the local area. My time as Guardian may be ending soon. If Daniel Cooper proves worthy, he must be prepared to face threats I hoped would never materialize. The walking stick beside. Daniel's chair suddenly felt less like a hiking aid and more like a weapon that might be needed for defense. Hidden within Arthur's personal effects, Daniel discovered a manila folder, labeled Successor Evaluation, subject Daniel. Cooper, the contents revealed the elaborate nature of Arthur's Guardian selection process and the months of careful observation that had preceded their accidental meeting on the mountain trail. Character assessment report ran to 15 pages of detailed psychological analysis. Arthur had documented Daniel's behavior in dozens of situations, most of which Daniel had never realized were being observed. Subject demonstrates consistent pattern of altruistic behavior without expectation of reward, Arthur had written. Observed helping elderly neighbor carry groceries on multiple occasions. When Mrs. Henderson offered payment, subject declined repeatedly and appeared genuinely uncomfortable with the suggestion of compensation. Daniel remembered Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor who struggled with heavy shopping bags. He'd never considered helping her as anything special, just basic human decency. But Arthur had been watching, evaluating, judging Daniel's character through these everyday interactions. The report detailed other incidents. Daniel returning a lost wallet with cash intact to the police. Volunteering at a local food bank without publicity or recognition, and most significantly, Daniel's reaction when he'd found a valuable antique in a thrift store. Subject discovered what appeared to be a genuine Civil War-era photograph among items priced at 50 cents. Rather than purchasing it for potential profit, subject informed store manager of its likely value. When manager offered to split any profits from proper sale, subject declined and suggested donating proceeds to local historical society. Daniel barely remembered that incident, but Arthur had been there, watching, noting Daniel's instinctive choice to ensure the artifact reached appropriate hands, rather than seeking personal gain. The psychological evaluation went deeper, analyzing Daniel's family background, educational choices, and professional decisions. Arthur had somehow accessed Daniel's college transcripts, employment records, and even medical history. Subject's choice to pursue graphic design over more lucrative careers suggests values alignment with guardian requirements. Despite financial struggles, consistently chooses creative fulfillment over material advancement. No evidence of gambling, substance abuse, or other behaviors that might compromise guardian responsibilities. More disturbing was the extent of Arthur's surveillance. The report included photographs of Daniel taken without his knowledge, hiking alone in the mountains, working late in his apartment, having coffee with friends. Arthur had been tracking Daniel's movements for at least 6 months, learning his routines and preferences with intelligence-gathering thoroughness. Subject's hiking patterns indicate familiarity with remote mountain terrain and comfort in isolated environments. Physical conditioning adequate for guardian requirements. More importantly, subject consistently chooses challenging solo hikes over social activities, suggesting independence and self-reliance necessary for guardian work. The evaluation compared Daniel to other potential candidates. Arthur had been watching 5 different people, subjecting each to various tests without their knowledge. Daniel was candidate number 3. 2 others had been eliminated for character flaws or behavioral concerns. Candidate 1 showed promise initially, but demonstrated concerning materialism when offered opportunity to purchase undervalued artwork. Chose personal profit over ethical considerations. Eliminated from consideration. Candidate 2 possessed excellent qualifications but revealed information about confidential work projects during casual conversation. Security risk too high for guardian responsibilities. Eliminated from consideration. The report revealed that Arthur's fall on the mountain trail had been deliberately staged. The elderly guardian had positioned himself at a location where Daniel regularly hiked, then used theater makeup and props to simulate injury, convincing enough to trigger Daniel's rescue instincts. Final field test executed successfully. Subject's response exceeded expectations, demonstrated medical knowledge, physical capability, emotional stability under pressure, and most importantly, refused all offers of compensation despite significant time investment and personal inconvenience. Arthur had even anticipated Daniel's reluctance to accept payment, noting it as the crucial indicator that he'd found his successor. Subject's discomfort with reward confirms psychological profile. True guardians serve for intrinsic rather than extrinsic motivation. Subject will accept responsibility not for personal gain, but from genuine commitment to preservation mission. The evaluation concluded with Arthur's formal recommendation. Daniel Cooper possesses all qualities essential for guardian success: integrity, intelligence, emotional stability, and commitment to values beyond personal benefit. Recommend immediate succession planning with full asset transfer upon my death. Most shocking was Arthur's contingency planning. He'd prepared detailed scenarios for different outcomes, including protocols if Daniel rejected the inheritance, if Daniel proved unworthy after accepting, or if Daniel was compromised by hostile forces. If subject refuses inheritance, activate Protocol 7. Transfer assets to National Historical Preservation Society with 50-year security seal. If subject accepts but proves inadequate, activate Protocol 9. Stage death and emergency relocation to backup guardian. Daniel realized he was reading the assessment of a master strategist who'd planned for every possible contingency. Arthur hadn't just chosen a successor. He'd engineered an entire transition operation with the precision of a military campaign. The walking stick's carved symbols suddenly made perfect sense. Each symbol represented a different aspect of guardian responsibility: preservation, secrecy, sacrifice, and service. Arthur had been carrying these principles his entire adult life, and now he'd passed them to Daniel through careful manipulation disguised as chance encounter. Sitting in Arthur's cabin, surrounded by evidence of months of surveillance and evaluation, Daniel felt both violated and honored. Arthur had invaded his privacy completely, but only to determine if Daniel was worthy of humanity's greatest trust. Armed with Arthur's final journal and authentication codes, Daniel approached the massive vault with trembling hands. The combination wasn't numbers. It was a sequence of movements corresponding to the symbols carved on Arthur's walking stick. Each symbol had to be pressed in the correct order, while simultaneously rotating the stick's handle to specific positions. The mechanism clicked with the precision of Swiss clockwork, and the heavy steel door swung open to reveal a climate-controlled chamber that extended deep into the mountain bedrock. Motion-activated LED lights illuminated shelving that stretched from floor to ceiling, holding treasures that represented centuries of human artistic achievement. The first item Daniel encountered took his breath away: an ancient golden chalice sitting on a velvet-lined pedestal near the vault entrance. A small placard in Arthur's precise handwriting identified it as Byzantine Communion Cup, Constantinople, 6th century CE, stolen from St. Sophia Cathedral. 1943, authentication confirmed by Professor Elena Vasquez, Universidad de Madrid. Daniel lifted the chalice carefully, marveling at its weight and the intricate religious scenes carved around its base. This wasn't just valuable metal. It was a sacred object that had served Christian communities for over 1,000 years before Nazi forces ripped it from its rightful home. The vault's inventory was staggering. Medieval manuscripts in protective cases lined one wall, their illuminated pages glowing under specialized lighting. Renaissance paintings, removed from their frames and stored flat in acid-free containers, included works Daniel recognized from art history textbooks, pieces that museums around the world listed as missing or destroyed during wartime. Arthur's detailed catalog system revealed the provenance of each item. Every treasure had been stolen during World War II, carefully documented by Nazi officers and eventually recovered by Guardian operations. Some items had been missing for decades before Guardian teams located them in private collections or black market sales. One section contained artifacts that predated the Nazi era entirely. Pre-Columbian goldwork from South America, ancient Egyptian artifacts, and Asian pottery suggested that Guardian operations extended far beyond World War II recovery missions. The organization protected cultural treasures whenever they were threatened by war, political upheaval, or criminal exploitation. Daniel spent hours examining individual pieces, each one representing not just artistic achievement, but the cultural identity of communities that had lost their heritage to conquest and theft. A carved jade mask from the Mayan civilization, an illuminated Quran from medieval Baghdad, a set of African bronze sculptures, treasures from every continent and every era of human civilization. The most sobering section contained items from the Holocaust itself, personal effects that had belonged to Jewish families, candlesticks, prayer books, family photographs saved from Nazi looting operations that had stripped entire communities of their possessions along with their lives. Arthur's notes explained the emotional weight of guardian work. These items represent more than artistic or monetary value. They are the surviving fragments of destroyed worlds, the only physical connections remaining to communities that were systematically eliminated. Our responsibility extends beyond preservation to remembrance. Near the vault center, Daniel discovered Arthur's personal workspace. A high-powered microscope, chemical testing equipment, and reference libraries filled a laboratory area where Arthur had authenticated artifacts and researched their histories. Hundreds of photographs documented his work. Before and after shots of restoration projects, comparison images used to identify forgeries, and detailed documentation of each item's condition. The workspace included correspondence with museum curators, university professors, and other experts who unknowingly contributed to Guardian operations. Arthur had maintained relationships with legitimate scholars while carefully concealing the true extent of his collection and its hidden location. Most impressive was Arthur's research into the current locations of still missing artifacts. Wall maps marked with colored pins showed known treasure sites across Europe, many of them in remote locations that remained unexplored. Arthur had been planning recovery operations that would continue his work for decades into the future, but it was the vault's security systems that revealed Arthur's awareness of current threats. Motion detectors, silent alarms, and what appeared to be defensive measures designed to protect the collection if the location was discovered. Arthur had prepared for siege conditions, installing systems that could seal the vault completely and preserve its contents even if the cabin above was destroyed. Sealed envelope marked "For my successor" contained Arthur's final instructions. The items in this vault represent 8 centuries of cultural theft and 70 years of Guardian recovery efforts. You now hold responsibility for treasures worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but their true value cannot be measured in money. These artifacts are the memory of humanity itself. Daniel sank into Arthur's laboratory chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd inherited. The golden chalice gleamed in the specialized lighting, beautiful and terrible in its significance. Every piece in this vault was evidence of humanity's capacity for both destroying and preserving its own heritage. The walking stick in his hands no longer felt like a simple hiking aid. It was the key to one of the world's most important secret repositories, and Daniel was now its sole guardian. Daniel's immersion in the vault's treasures was interrupted by a discovery that sent ice through his veins. Hidden beneath Arthur's laboratory desk, he found a file marked "Immediate Threat, Klaus Brenner." Inside was a threatening letter dated just 2 weeks before Arthur's death, written on expensive letterhead bearing the logo of Brenner Historical Recovery Services. The letter's formal language barely concealed its menacing intent. "Mr. Whitmore, our organization has become aware of your possession of certain artifacts that rightfully belong to the Brenner family estate. These items were legally acquired by my grandfather during his service to the German Reich and represent our family's cultural heritage. We demand their immediate return to avoid unfortunate consequences." Arthur's handwritten response, found clipped to the letter, was characteristically direct. "Mr. Brenner, the items you seek were stolen from their rightful owners during systematic cultural genocide. They will never be returned to the criminals who took them. Find another way to honor your grandfather's memory." Daniel's hands shook as he realized the implications. Arthur's death, attributed to heart failure, might not have been natural. Klaus Brenner had made explicit threats just days before Arthur passed away. Peacefully in his sleep, a coincidence that suddenly seemed highly suspicious. The file contained extensive research Arthur had conducted on the Brenner family and their historical recovery operation. Klaus Brenner, 52, was the grandson of SS Oberfuhrer Heinrich Brenner, who had supervised cultural theft operations across Eastern Europe. Unlike many Nazi descendants who distanced themselves from their ancestors' crimes, Klaus had embraced his grandfather's mission and built a legitimate business around it. Brenner Historical Recovery Services operated as a high-end consulting firm that helped wealthy collectors locate and acquire displaced artifacts. Their client list included private museums, corporate collections, and individuals seeking to purchase items with questionable provenance. The business provided perfect cover for more aggressive recovery operations, targeting Guardian caches. Arthur's investigation revealed the scope of Brenner's network. The organization employed former military personnel, private investigators, and technology specialists capable of sophisticated surveillance operations. They had access to historical documents, including Nazi records that detailed original theft operations and possible hiding places. Most disturbing was evidence that Brenner had infiltrated academic and museum communities. Several respected scholars were unknowingly providing information about missing artifacts. Their research funded by Brenner grants that came with carefully crafted questions about specific pieces and their potential locations. The file included surveillance photos showing Brenner operatives watching known Guardian locations. Arthur had identified at least 6 instances where Guardian properties were being monitored by teams using professional equipment. The photos showed the same vehicles and personnel at multiple sites, confirming that this was a coordinated campaign rather than isolated incidents. Arthur's notes revealed his growing paranoia in his final months. Brenner's people are getting closer. They know about the network structure and have identified several Guardian locations. Elena Rodriguez reported being followed in Arizona. Alpine 3 found electronic surveillance devices near his property. "We are being hunted systematically." The letter included specific references to items in Arthur's collection, mentioning the Byzantine chalice by name and describing other pieces with accuracy that suggested inside knowledge. Someone with access to Guardian records was feeding information to Brenner's organization. "Your continued possession of the Constantinople chalice, the Prague altar pieces, and the Krakow manuscripts constitutes theft of German cultural property," the letter stated. These items were legitimately acquired during wartime operations and documented according to proper military procedures. Arthur's margin notes on this passage were filled with rage. Legitimate acquisition? Proper military procedures? They murdered the priests and parishioners, then looted their churches. There is nothing legitimate about genocide. The file's final section contained Arthur's contingency plans for dealing with the Brenner threat. He had prepared detailed protocols for emergency evacuation of the most valuable pieces, established backup communication channels with other Guardians, and even considered relocating his entire operation to a more secure location. But Arthur's age and declining health had limited his options. His final note was dated 3 days before his encounter with Daniel on the mountain trail. "Cannot outrun them much longer. Physical capabilities declining. Must accelerate successor selection and transfer critical knowledge before Brenner makes his move." Daniel studied the threatening letter again, noting the corporate letterhead and professional formatting that masked its true nature. This wasn't the work of amateur treasure hunters or opportunistic criminals. Brenner had created a sophisticated organization dedicated to reclaiming what he considered his family's stolen property, regardless of how many people he had to kill to get it. The letter's closing paragraph chilled Daniel to the bone, Time is running short. Mr. Whitmore, my grandfather spent his final years watching Allied forces distribute his carefully collected treasures to unworthy hands. I will not make the same mistake. What belongs to the Brenner family will be reclaimed, with or without your cooperation. Outside the cabin, wind moved through the trees with a sound like whispered threats. Daniel realized that accepting Arthur's inheritance meant accepting Klaus Brenner as an enemy, a man with resources, determination, and a complete lack of moral restraint in pursuing his goals. Daniel's blood ran cold when he discovered the surveillance photographs hidden in Arthur's emergency protocols file. The images showed him at his apartment, walking to his car, even sitting in his favorite coffee shop, all taken without his knowledge over the past 3 days. Klaus Brenner's operatives had found their new target. The photos were professionally shot with high-end telephoto equipment, indicating serious resources and planning. Someone had been tracking Daniel's movements since Arthur's death, learning his routines and identifying vulnerabilities. Red circles drawn on the images marked potential approach routes to his apartment and workplace. Daniel's hands trembled as he studied the images. In one photograph, taken through his apartment window, he was clearly visible reading Arthur's journals at his kitchen table. The angle suggested the photographer had been positioned in the building across the street, possibly for hours, documenting Daniel's discovery of his inheritance. Most disturbing was a photo taken that morning as Daniel drove to the cabin. The image captured his license plate number and showed a second vehicle following at a discreet distance. Brenner's people had tracked him to Arthur's property, which meant the cabin's location was now compromised. Arthur's emergency protocols suddenly became critical survival information. The old guardian had prepared detailed instructions for what to do if the cabin was discovered, including escape routes through the mountain forest and emergency supply caches hidden throughout the region. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Cooper, we need to meet. Your safety depends on returning what doesn't belong to you. The coffee shop on Pine Street, 1 hour. Come alone." The message's casual tone made it more threatening than any dramatic ultimatum. These people knew where he lived, where he worked, and how to reach him whenever they chose. They were demonstrating their capability while offering what appeared to be a reasonable negotiation. Daniel grabbed the emergency protocols and Arthur's communication equipment, following the cabin's evacuation procedures with growing panic. Arthur had prepared for this scenario, installing hidden cameras that allowed monitoring of the access road from inside the vault. The screens showed 2 black SUVs parked near the property entrance, their occupants waiting patiently. The surveillance system revealed the professionalism of Brenner's operation. The vehicles were positioned to control the main road while leaving the forest escape routes apparently unmonitored. But Arthur's notes warned that this was likely intentional. Experienced hunters always left their prey an apparent escape route that led exactly where they wanted. Following Arthur's protocols, Daniel activated the cabin's security lockdown. Steel shutters sealed all windows, reinforced doors engaged their electronic locks, and the vault entrance became hidden behind a false wall that would fool casual inspection. The cabin transformed from a comfortable retreat into a fortress designed to buy time, rather than withstand extended siege. Arthur's emergency supplies included cash, false identification documents, and detailed maps of escape routes through terrain too rough for vehicle pursuit. The old guardian had planned for every contingency, creating multiple options for evading capture while protecting the vault's location. Daniel's phone rang as he prepared to flee through the forest. Margaret Chen's voice was tense with worry. "Daniel, where are you? Men came to my office asking about Arthur's estate. They seemed very interested in the cabin's location." "Don't tell them anything," Daniel whispered, watching the surveillance screens as more vehicles arrived at the property entrance. "These people are dangerous. They had badges, some kind of federal investigation. But something felt wrong about their questions. They're not federal agents. Don't trust anyone who asks about Arthur or the inheritance." Daniel ended the call and followed Arthur's escape route through a concealed exit in the basement. The path led through a natural cave system that emerged half a mile away, well beyond any reasonable surveillance perimeter. Moving through the underground passage, Daniel carried only essential items: Arthur's walking stick, the communication radio, emergency cache, and one of the smaller artifacts from the vault, a medieval religious medal that could serve as proof of the collection's significance if he needed to convince other guardians of his legitimacy. The cave system was better maintained than expected, with battery-powered lighting and cached supplies at regular intervals. Arthur had spent years preparing these escape routes, understanding that Guardian work might eventually require running for his life, emerging from the caves into dense forest. Daniel could hear vehicles moving along distant roads. Brenner's people were conducting a systematic search, using enough personnel to cover multiple escape routes simultaneously. This wasn't amateur treasure hunting. It was a military-style operation with professional coordination. Daniel's phone showed dozens of missed calls and text messages, all from unknown numbers. Brenner's organization was trying every method to establish contact, alternating between threats and seemingly reasonable offers to negotiate. Moving deeper into the wilderness, Daniel realized that accepting Arthur's inheritance had made him a target in a war that had been raging since World War II. The surveillance photographs proved that there was no going back to his normal life. Brenner would pursue him until he surrendered the treasures or died protecting them. Deep in the forest, Daniel's emergency radio crackled to life with an encrypted transmission. Following Arthur's communication protocols, he responded with the authentication codes that identified him as the new Cascade 7. The voice that answered belonged to Elena Vasquez, Desert 12, calling from her secure location in Arizona. Cascade 7, we've been monitoring Brenner communications. They're mobilizing resources across multiple states. You need immediate extraction from your current position. Elena guided Daniel to a backup meeting location, an abandoned fire tower 20 miles north through difficult terrain. The rendezvous point was part of the Guardian Network's emergency protocols, established for situations exactly like this, when individual Guardians were compromised and needed assistance. The hike took Daniel through some of the most challenging wilderness in the Cascades. Following game trails and compass bearings Elena provided, he moved carefully to avoid leaving tracks that Brenner's people could follow. Arthur's emergency supplies included specialized boots that minimized footprints and clothing designed to blend with forest colors. Elena's contact list, hidden in Arthur's emergency kit, revealed the true scope of the Guardian network. The encrypted directory contained names, call signs, and secure communication methods for Guardians across 6 continents. Arthur had been part of a global organization with hundreds of active members, all protecting cultural treasures from various threats. The list showed recent casualties that painted a grim picture of Brenner's campaign. 5 Guardians had died or disappeared in the past 6 months, their territories marked with red ink, indicating compromised security. The patterns suggested systematic targeting rather than random accidents. Daniel reached the fire tower as sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Elena Vasquez emerged from concealment with the fluid movements of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. At 45, she had the weathered appearance of someone who spent significant time outdoors. But her alert eyes missed nothing about their surroundings. "You're Arthur's successor," she said, studying Daniel with professional assessment. "He chose well. You made it through hostile territory without being detected." Eleanor's expertise became apparent as she explained the current situation. She'd been tracking Brenner's organization for 2 years, watching them systematically identify and target Guardian locations. Her intelligence network included contacts in law enforcement, academia, and the international art community. Brenner's grandfather kept detailed records of Nazi theft operations. Klaus has spent decades matching those records with current intelligence about missing artifacts. He knows what we're protecting and approximately where to find it. She showed Daniel intelligence reports documenting Brenner's recent activities. The organization had acquired sophisticated surveillance equipment, hired former military personnel, and established legitimate business fronts in multiple countries. They were operating with resources that rivaled government agencies. Most dangerous is their infiltration of academic communities. Several respected scholars are unknowingly providing research assistance, thinking they're helping locate artifacts for legitimate museums. Brenner funds their work through shell organizations and carefully guides their investigations toward Guardian territories. Eleanor's own territory included pre-Columbian artifacts recovered from private collectors and black market dealers. Her secure facility in the Arizona desert protected treasures that represented the cultural heritage of indigenous communities throughout the Americas. The network is fragmenting, Elena explained. Too many Guardians have been compromised. Communication channels are no longer secure. We're being forced to operate independently, which makes us more vulnerable to Brenner's systematic approach. Daniel learned that Arthur's death was part of a larger pattern. Brenner's people were targeting older Guardians who might be more vulnerable to health emergencies or accidents. Several deaths attributed to natural causes were now suspect when viewed as part of a coordinated campaign. Arthur was brilliant to prepare you so thoroughly. Most Guardian successions take years of gradual training. You've been thrown into advanced operations with minimal preparation, but you're handling it better than expected. Elena's assessment of their strategic situation was sobering. Brenner's organization was growing stronger while the Guardian network weakened. They needed to adapt quickly or risk losing treasures that had been protected for decades. We have advantages they don't expect. Guardian training includes skills they haven't planned for: wilderness survival, emergency communications, and most importantly, commitment to principles beyond personal survival. Brenner's people are mercenaries. We're Guardians. As darkness settled over the mountains, Elena activated her own communication equipment to contact other surviving Guardians. The radio conversations revealed a network under siege, but not defeated. Alpine 3 reported successful relocation of his most valuable pieces. Coastal 9 had established new security protocols that detected surveillance attempts. The network is evolving, Elena explained. Brenner's attacks are forcing us to become more sophisticated, more careful, and more unified. Arthur's death was a loss, but your succession proves the system works. Elena handed Daniel a Guardian identification badge, a small metal disc engraved with symbols similar to those on Arthur's walking stick. This authenticates your status to other Guardians. More importantly, it reminds you that you're not alone in this fight. Looking at the badge, Daniel realized he was no longer just inheriting Arthur's responsibility. He was joining a community of people dedicated to preserving humanity's cultural heritage against those who would exploit it for personal gain. Daniel's sense of security shattered when Elena discovered a GPS tracking device hidden in his jacket pocket. The sophisticated device was no larger than a coin, military-grade equipment that explained how Brenner's people had followed him through the wilderness despite his careful evasion techniques. They tagged you before you left the cabin, Elena said, examining the device with professional interest. This is advanced surveillance technology, not something civilians can acquire easily. Brenner has serious resources and government connections. The tracking device represented a new level of threat sophistication that neither Daniel nor Elena had anticipated. Its presence meant that Brenner's organization had been close enough to Daniel to plant surveillance equipment without his knowledge, possibly while he was unconscious or distracted. Elena's portable scanner revealed more disturbing news. The device had been transmitting Daniel's location continuously for the past 18 hours. Brenner's people knew exactly where he was and had likely used the tracking data to position teams along his escape route. "We need to move immediately," Eleanor said. destroying the device with a small electromagnetic pulse generator from her equipment kit. They're probably converging on this location as we speak. Their hurried evacuation from the fire tower confirmed Elena's assessment. Vehicle lights were visible on distant forest roads, moving in coordinated patterns that suggested multiple teams conducting a systematic search. Brenner's operation had resources that rivaled law enforcement agencies. Elena led Daniel through emergency protocols that revealed the Guardian Network's adaptation to modern threats. They used encrypted satellite communications, digital currency transfers, and identity documents that would fool casual inspection. The network had evolved far beyond Arthur's World War II-era methods. Alpine 3 went dark yesterday, Elena reported during their forced march through difficult terrain. His last transmission indicated hostile surveillance of his property. We have to assume he's been captured or eliminated. The loss of experienced Guardians was accelerating. Elena's intelligence network revealed similar incidents across Europe and North America. Brenner's organization was systematically dismantling Guardian operations faster than the network could adapt or respond. They're using our own protocols against us, Elena explained. Someone with inside knowledge is feeding them information about our communication schedules, meeting locations, and security procedures. The possibility of infiltration within the Guardian network added paranoia to their already dangerous situation. Elena had to carefully verify Daniel's identity multiple times, following authentication procedures that seemed excessive until the stakes became clear. Daniel's phone continued receiving calls and messages from Brenner's organization, but the tone had shifted from negotiation to intimidation. Recent texts included photographs of his apartment building, his workplace, and locations where his friends and family lived. "We know where your sister works," one message read. "We know your nephew's school schedule. This doesn't have to involve innocent people, Mr. Cooper." Elena's response was immediate and decisive. "They're escalating to family threats. That means they're getting desperate but also more dangerous. We need to contact other Guardians and coordinate a response before they eliminate everyone with knowledge of the network." Her communication equipment revealed the global scope of Brenner's campaign. Similar tracking devices had been found on Guardians in France, Germany, and Australia. The organization was conducting simultaneous operations on multiple continents, suggesting resources and coordination that exceeded anything the Guardians had prepared for. "This isn't random treasure hunting," Elena said, studying the pattern of attacks. "They're implementing a comprehensive strategy to acquire maximum artifacts with minimum resistance. Someone with military planning experience is coordinating this operation." Elena's intelligence files included background information on Brenner's key personnel. Several were former military officers with experience in special operations. Others had worked for private security firms that specialized in asset recovery and corporate espionage. "Klaus Brenner isn't just pursuing his grandfather's legacy," Elena explained. "He's built a sophisticated organization that treats cultural artifacts as strategic resources. They're applying military tactics to treasure hunting." The discovery of advanced surveillance equipment forced Elena and Daniel to abandon standard Guardian protocols. They couldn't use regular communication channels, meet at established safe houses, or follow predetermined escape routes. Everything Arthur had taught the network was potentially compromised. "We're reverting to emergency protocols developed for wartime conditions," Elena said. "Complete communication blackout except for emergency transmissions. Movement only during conditions that limit surveillance effectiveness. Trust no one outside the immediate team." As they moved through the forest darkness, Daniel realized that Brenner's sophistication had transformed their situation from treasure hunting to warfare. The tracking device proved that they were fighting an enemy with resources, intelligence, and tactical planning that made conventional Guardian operations obsolete. Elena's final assessment was grimly realistic. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and partially compromised. Our only advantages are knowledge of the terrain, commitment to the mission, and willingness to sacrifice everything to protect what we're guarding. The GPS device, small and innocuous in Elena's hand, represented the technological gap they needed to overcome if they hoped to survive Brenner's systematic campaign in their emergency hideout, a forgotten mining cabin deep in the wilderness. Elena revealed the most damning evidence against Brenner's organization. A torn page from Adolf Hitler's personal diary, dated April 1945. The fragmentary document, written in the Führer's distinctive handwriting, outlined the true scope of Nazi cultural theft operations and their intended purpose. Arthur recovered this from a bombed bunker in Berlin, Elena explained, handling the yellowed paper with reverent care. It's one of only 3 known pages from Hitler's final diary to survive the war. The content explains why Brenner is so determined to reclaim these artifacts. Daniel studied the German text, using Elena's translation to understand its significance. Hitler's words, penned in the final days of the Third Reich, revealed cultural theft as part of a larger strategy extending far beyond simple greed or artistic appreciation. The acquisition of European cultural treasures serves dual purposes, Hitler had written. Immediate value provides funding for post-war operations, while possession of these artifacts establishes legitimate claim to the territories from which they were taken. Future generations of National Socialists will use these cultural holdings to justify territorial reclamation. The diary page explained Klaus Brenner's motivation in chilling detail. He wasn't just pursuing family heritage or valuable artifacts. He was implementing a strategy his grandfather's generation had designed for continuing Nazi objectives after military defeat. Elena's research revealed how this strategy had influenced post-war Nazi operations. Stolen cultural artifacts had been used to fund escape networks, establish new identities, and maintain organizational structure among Nazi survivors in South America and other safe havens. Klaus Brenner believes he's completing his grandfather's mission, Elena explained. In his mind, recovering these artifacts isn't theft. It's reclaiming strategic assets that belong to the continuation of the Third Reich. The diary page included specific references to items now in Guardian protection. Hitler had personally selected certain artifacts for their symbolic importance, understanding that cultural treasures could serve political purposes for generations. The Byzantine chalice Daniel had seen in Arthur's vault was specifically mentioned as essential for establishing religious legitimacy in Eastern European operations. Elena's intelligence files documented how Brenner's organization had used recovered artifacts to fund their expansion. Each successful theft provided resources for more sophisticated equipment, additional personnel, and expanded operations. They were becoming stronger with every Guardian cache they compromised. The network underestimated the threat because we thought we were dealing with treasure hunters, Elena said. We didn't realize we were fighting the continuation of a systematic campaign that began during the war itself. The diary page also revealed the psychological importance of the artifacts to Nazi ideology. Hitler had written extensively about the spiritual power of cultural objects, believing that possessing them transferred some essential quality of the cultures they represented. By controlling European cultural heritage, we control European identity itself, Hitler's diary declared. Future generations will understand their history through artifacts we have selected and preserved. Cultural conquest achieves what military conquest cannot: permanent transformation of human consciousness. Daniel felt sick as he understood the implications. Brenner wasn't just stealing valuable objects. He was attempting to control how future generations understood their own cultural heritage. The Guardian Network wasn't just protecting artifacts. They were defending the integrity of human historical memory. Elena revealed that similar diary pages had been discovered in other Nazi hiding places, each one providing pieces of a larger strategic puzzle. The cultural theft program had been designed to continue indefinitely, with each generation of Nazi descendants carrying forward specific responsibilities. Klaus Brenner inherited more than artifacts, Elena explained. He inherited a mission, complete with strategic planning, resource allocation, and specific objectives. He's not improvising. He's following a detailed plan his grandfather's generation created. The diary page included references to other families involved in the post-war continuation strategy. The Brenners were part of a larger network of Nazi descendants who had maintained organizational connections and shared resources across generations. This explains their coordination and resources, Elena said. They've had 80 years to plan this operation, establish legitimate business fronts, and infiltrate academic and political communities. We're fighting an organization that's been preparing for this moment since 1945. Daniel studied Hitler's handwriting, finding it almost impossible to believe that these faded words on yellowed paper could still be driving violence decades later. The diary page represented the persistence of evil across generations and the responsibility each generation bore to resist it. Arthur suspected this connection, but couldn't prove it, Elena continued. He spent years tracking Brenner family activities, trying to understand why they were so sophisticated and well-funded. This diary page confirms his worst fears. The document's authenticity had been verified by multiple experts, though its contents were too sensitive for public disclosure. The implications that Nazi strategic planning was still actively influencing current events would create international political complications. "We're not just protecting artifacts," Elena said, carefully returning the diary page to its protective case. "We're protecting the future from a past that refuses to stay buried." The confrontation Elena had been preparing for arrived at dawn, announced by the sound of helicopters circling their remote hideout. Through binoculars, Daniel watched as professional teams deployed around the mining cabin with military precision. Klaus Brenner had found them, and this time there would be no escape through forest trails. Elena retrieved Arthur's service weapon from her emergency supplies. Obri Issi. World War II era Colt, 1911. Pistol with an inscription reading, "For those who guard what matters." The weapon had belonged to Arthur during his early Guardian missions and carried symbolic weight beyond its practical utility. Arthur carried this during the Munich operation, Elena explained, checking the weapon's condition with practiced efficiency. He told me it represented the Guardian principle, that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. Daniel had never held a gun before, but Elena's brief instruction focused on fundamental concepts rather than detailed training. "Point squeeze, don't jerk the trigger. But remember, our goal is protection, not aggression. We fight only when there's no alternative." The pistol felt heavy in Daniel's hands, its weight representing not just metal and gunpowder, but the accumulated responsibility of generations who had chosen to stand against those who would exploit cultural heritage for personal gain, Brenner's voice echoed. Across the valley, through a portable speaker system, "Mr. Cooper, Miss Vasquez, there's no need for unnecessary violence. We simply want to discuss the return of artifacts that rightfully belong to my family. You're outnumbered and surrounded. Let's resolve this like civilized people." Elena's response was to activate her emergency beacon, sending coded signals to surviving Guardians across the continent. If they were captured or killed, other Guardians would know that Brenner's organization had escalated to direct assault and could prepare accordingly. Arthur's security protocols included provisions for this scenario, Elena whispered, as they prepared defensive positions within the cabin. "If we can delay them for 30 minutes, backup protocols will ensure the network's survival, even if we don't." Through the cabin's reinforced windows, Daniel could see Brenner's operatives advancing with professional caution. They wore tactical gear and moved with coordination that confirmed their military backgrounds. This wasn't treasure hunting, it was an assault operation. Elena used the cabin's concealed communication equipment to contact other Guardian cells, providing real-time intelligence about Brenner's tactics and personnel. Each piece of information she transmitted could help other Guardians prepare for similar attacks. Alpine 4 responding, came a voice through the radio static. Swiss law enforcement notified of your situation. International protocols activated. Reinforcements en route, but may not arrive in time. The mention of international protocols revealed another layer of Guardian operations Daniel hadn't understood. The network maintained relationships with legitimate law enforcement agencies, providing mutual assistance when cultural crimes crossed national boundaries. Brenner's assault began with tear gas canisters thrown through the cabin windows. Elena had prepared for this contingency, distributing gas masks from Arthur's emergency supplies. The old Guardian had anticipated every possible threat scenario. As Brenner's operatives breached the cabin's defenses, Elena and Daniel fought with desperate determination. The antique pistol performed flawlessly despite its age, each shot representing Arthur's commitment to the Guardian mission, extending through time to protect them in their moment of greatest need. Elena's sacrifice came as she held the main entrance against overwhelming odds, allowing Daniel to escape through Arthur's hidden tunnel system. Her final radio transmission was characteristically professional. Cascade 7, complete the mission. The network depends on continuity of guardianship. Daniel emerged from the tunnel system to find Brenner's helicopters departing with Elena as their prisoner. Klaus Brenner himself stood beside the burning cabin, examining artifacts his people had recovered from Elena's emergency supplies. "Mr. Cooper," Brenner called across the clearing. "Ms. Vasquez was brave but ultimately foolish. You have 1 hour to contact me with your surrender terms, or her fate will demonstrate the consequences of continued resistance." Daniel clutched Arthur's pistol, understanding that Elena's capture had transformed his situation completely. He could no longer simply protect the artifacts. He now had to rescue the person who had risked everything. To help him understand his Guardian responsibilities, Brenner's helicopter disappeared beyond the mountain ridges, carrying Elena toward an unknown fate. The burning cabin sent smoke signals visible for miles, marking the end of one phase of their conflict and the beginning of something far more dangerous. The antique pistol's weight in Daniel's hands reminded him that Guardians throughout history had faced similar moments, times when retreat meant abandoning everything they had sworn to protect, and advance meant accepting odds that rational people would consider hopeless. Arthur's inscription seemed to pulse with new meaning. For those who guard what matters. Elena mattered. The artifacts mattered. The principle that some things could not be bought, sold, or surrendered mattered more than personal safety. Daniel checked the pistol's remaining ammunition and began planning Elena's rescue. Understanding that he was no longer just inheriting Arthur's legacy, he was writing the next chapter of Guardian history with decisions that would echo across generations. Daniel's rescue of Elena came at a terrible cost. Following Arthur's emergency protocols and his own desperate determination, he had tracked Brenner's operation to an abandoned logging facility 20 miles north. The assault on their temporary headquarters succeeded through surprise and the Guardian network's coordinated response. But Elena paid the ultimate price for their victory. As she lay dying in Daniel's arms, Elena pressed her Guardian badge into his hands. The small metal disc, engraved with symbols representing her responsibility for Southwest cultural treasures, was warm from her body heat and slick with her blood. "The network survives," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sounds of distant sirens as law enforcement finally arrived. Alpine 4 secured the Swiss caches. Coastal 9 relocated the California collections. "Your sacrifice made the difference." Daniel wanted to correct her. He wasn't the one making the sacrifice, but Elena's eyes had already lost their focus. She died holding his hand, her Guardian badge transferred to him in the ancient tradition of succession under fire that dated back to the earliest days of cultural protection. Elena's badge represented more than her individual service. According to Guardian protocols Daniel had learned from Arthur's journals, accepting another Guardian's badge meant assuming responsibility for their territory and the treasures they had protected. Elena's death made Daniel Guardian of both Pacific Northwest and Southwest regions. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation revealed the scope of their victory and loss. Klaus Brenner's organization had been severely disrupted, with key personnel captured and their sophisticated surveillance network compromised. But Elena's death demonstrated the very real cost of Guardian work. International law enforcement agencies, alerted by the Guardian Network's emergency protocols, arrested dozens of Brenner operatives across 3 countries. The legitimacy that Brenner Historical Recovery Services had provided was stripped away as investigators uncovered evidence of systematic theft, assault, and murder. Klaus Brenner himself escaped during the chaos, but his carefully constructed organization lay in ruins. Years of planning and resource accumulation had been destroyed in a single coordinated response by Guardians who had learned to fight with the same sophistication their enemies employed. Daniel found Elena's personal files among the recovered evidence, revealing the full scope of her Guardian work. She had protected pre-Columbian artifacts representing dozens of indigenous cultures, maintained relationships with tribal elders who helped authenticate pieces, and operated a scholarship fund that supported young Native American students studying their cultural heritage. Her Guardian badge had been earned through 15 years of service that included recovering stolen artifacts from private collectors, preventing the destruction of archaeological sites, and maintaining secure storage for treasures that were too sensitive for public display. The badge's engravings told the story of Elena's Guardian career. Small symbols marked successful operations, the recovery of Mayan artifacts from illegal excavations, the protection of Pueblo pottery during political upheaval, the rescue of Apache ceremonial objects from black market dealers. Daniel understood that accepting Elena's badge meant accepting responsibility for continuing work that had defined her adult life. Her territory included relationships with indigenous communities, ongoing investigations of cultural theft, and secure facilities that required constant maintenance and protection. The Guardian Network's response to Elena's death revealed their commitment to honor fallen members through action rather than ceremony. Within hours of her death, other Guardians had secured her facilities, contacted her tribal liaisons, and ensured continuity of protection for artifacts she had guarded. Elena's work continues through you, Alpine 4 transmitted during their first communication after the crisis. The network is stronger because of her sacrifice, and the enemy is weaker because of your courage. But Daniel felt only the weight of loss and responsibility. Elena had given her life to protect not just artifacts, but the principle that cultural heritage belonged to humanity rather than individuals wealthy enough to purchase it. Her badge represented a commitment that transcended personal safety. Arthur's walking stick, still in Daniel's possession, seemed to resonate with Elena's badge. Both artifacts represented Guardian service across generations, connecting individual sacrifice to a larger mission that extended far beyond any single person's lifetime. The law enforcement debriefing revealed how close Brenner had come to destroying the entire Guardian network. His systematic approach had identified vulnerabilities that could have compromised protection. For cultural treasures across 6 continents, Elena's intelligence work had been crucial in developing the coordinated response that prevented total disaster. Her analysis of Brenner's organization, her maintenance of international contacts, and her preparation of emergency protocols had enabled Guardians worldwide to respond effectively when crisis finally arrived. Daniel placed Elena's badge beside Arthur's walking stick on the table of his temporary safe house. 2 artifacts from 2 Guardians who had given everything to protect humanity's cultural heritage. Now both responsibilities belonged to him, along with the knowledge that future guardians would judge his service by the same standards of sacrifice and commitment that Eleanor and Arthur had demonstrated. 6 months after Elena's death, Daniel stood in Arthur's renovated cabin, installing the final components of a cutting-edge digital security system. The sophisticated equipment represented a new generation of guardian protection, motion sensors linked to satellite communication, biometric locks integrated with international databases, and surveillance capabilities that could detect threats before they reach the property. Perimeter. The centerpiece of the modernization was a quantum-encrypted communication array that allowed instantaneous secure contact with guardians worldwide. Unlike Arthur's vintage radio equipment, this system provided video communication, file sharing, and coordination capabilities that matched the sophistication of the threats they faced. Cascade 7 to all stations, Daniel spoke into the new system's microphone. Security upgrade complete. Testing new protocols for network-wide implementation. Responses came immediately from guardians across 6 continents. Their voices clear and coordinated through technology that would have seemed like science fiction to Arthur's generation. The network was evolving, adapting lessons learned from Brenner's assault to create stronger defenses against future threats. Daniel had spent months working with technology specialists to develop security systems that could protect cultural treasures against modern surveillance methods while maintaining the accessibility necessary for guardian work. The new equipment represented a collaboration between traditional guardian principles and 21st century capabilities. The vault's contents had been reorganized according to updated preservation protocols that Elena had helped develop before her death. Climate control systems maintained precise temperature and humidity levels, while new storage materials protected artifacts from environmental damage that could accumulate over decades. Most importantly, Daniel had implemented Elena's proposal for distributed storage. Rather than keeping all treasures in a single location, the most valuable pieces were now secured in multiple sites connected through the digital network. No single attack could compromise the entire collection. The digital security system included protocols for training new guardians more efficiently than the traditional apprenticeship method Arthur had experienced. Virtual reality simulations allowed candidates to practice authentication techniques, emergency procedures, and threat response without risking actual artifacts. Daniel's first trainee was Sarah Martinez, Elena's 26-year-old niece who had inherited her aunt's commitment to cultural preservation, along with her academic credentials in archaeology and museum studies. Unlike Daniel's abrupt introduction to guardian work, Sarah was receiving comprehensive preparation for the responsibilities ahead. The authentication process requires both technical knowledge and intuitive understanding, Daniel explained, as Sarah examined a medieval manuscript through the new digital microscope system. Technology helps us verify materials and methods, but recognizing forgeries requires experience with authentic pieces. Sarah's training progressed rapidly, aided by educational resources that previous generations of guardians had lacked. Digital archives contain detailed documentation of every recovered artifact, including authentication records, historical provenance, and conservation requirements. The new Guardian training program included psychological preparation for the isolation and responsibility that had challenged earlier generations. Support networks, counseling resources, and regular communication schedules helped prevent the emotional toll that had affected guardians like Arthur, who worked in complete solitude. Daniel had also established a scholarship fund in Elena's memory, supporting young people from communities whose cultural heritage was represented in guardian collections. The program created relationships between guardians and the cultures they protected, ensuring that preservation efforts honored the wishes of original creators. The digital system's most innovative feature was its predictive threat assessment capability. Machine learning algorithms analyzed patterns in art theft, political instability, and criminal activity to identify potential threats before they developed into active dangers. The network is becoming proactive rather than reactive, Daniel explained during a video conference with other Guardians. Instead of waiting for attacks, we can identify vulnerabilities and address them before criminals exploit them. Alpine 4 reported similar modernization efforts in Switzerland, where traditional Guardian methods were being enhanced with contemporary security technology. The entire network was transforming, becoming more connected, more sophisticated, and more effective at protecting cultural treasures. But Daniel insisted that technological advancement served traditional Guardian principles rather than replace them. The new systems enhanced human judgment and commitment without substituting efficiency for wisdom that came from understanding cultural significance. Technology is our tool, not our master, Daniel reminded Sarah during her training. Arthur protected these treasures for decades, using basic equipment and absolute dedication. Our advanced systems make us more effective, but they don't make us Guardians. Character makes us Guardians. The digital security system represented Daniel's contribution to Guardian evolution, a synthesis of traditional values with contemporary capabilities that honored both Arthur's legacy and Elena's sacrifice while preparing the network for challenges that future generations would face. Looking at the sophisticated equipment surrounding him, Daniel understood that he was no longer just inheriting responsibility. He was actively shaping how that responsibility would be carried forward by Guardians not yet born. 1 year after Arthur's death, Daniel stood at the old man's graveside with Elena's family, holding Arthur's final letter, a personal message that had waited in the vault's deepest security compartment for this anniversary moment. The envelope bore instructions to be opened only after Daniel had served as Guardian for a full year, ensuring he would understand its contents through experience rather than theory. Arthur's final handwriting was shakier than in his journals, written during his last days, when he knew Brenner's threat was approaching and his own time was ending. But the words carried the same quiet wisdom that had guided his decades of Guardian service. "My dear successor," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then you have survived your first year as Guardian and understand both the burden and the privilege of our calling. The year has taught you what I could never explain in words, that Guardian work transforms not just what we protect, but who we become in the process of protection." Daniel felt the truth of those words as he stood surrounded by people whose lives had been changed by Guardian work. Sarah Martinez had completed her training and established her own territory, protecting Native American artifacts. Representatives from tribal communities Elena had served attended the memorial, honoring both Guardians who had preserved their cultural heritage. Arthur's letter revealed insights about Guardian psychology that could only come from decades of service. The loneliness you have felt is necessary, but not permanent. True Guardians discover that isolation from ordinary life creates deeper connection to the human story we preserve. You protect not just objects, but the meaning they carry across generations. Margaret Chen, the lawyer who had delivered Daniel's inheritance, stood nearby with law enforcement officials who had helped prosecute Brenner's organization. The legal proceedings had revealed the international scope of cultural theft and led to improved protection for archaeological sites worldwide. You have learned by now that Guardian work never truly ends. Arthur's letter continued. Each generation faces new threats, requiring new solutions, but the principles remain constant: integrity over profit, preservation over exploitation, service over recognition. These values become part of your character through practice, not study. Daniel reflected on how the past year had changed him. The shy graphic designer who had rescued an elderly stranger on a mountain trail no longer existed. In his place stood someone who could coordinate international security operations, train new Guardians, and make life-or-death decisions that affected cultural preservation worldwide. Arthur's letter addressed the weight of responsibility that every Guardian eventually confronted. There will be moments when you question whether the sacrifice is worthwhile, whether ordinary life might offer more happiness than service to principles larger than yourself. Those moments test not your knowledge, but your character. Remember that happiness comes from alignment between values and actions, not from comfort or convenience. The memorial service included readings from cultures represented in the Guardian collections. A Navajo elder spoke about the spiritual responsibility of protecting sacred objects. A Greek Orthodox priest discussed the religious significance of Byzantine artifacts. A Holocaust survivor's daughter honored the memory of communities whose cultural treasures had been stolen along with their lives. The true measure of Guardian success, Arthur's letter explained, is not the artifacts preserved, but the understanding passed forward. Each Guardian teaches the next generation not just procedures and protocols, but the reasons why cultural preservation matters to human dignity and continuity. Daniel had established several innovations that Arthur would have appreciated. The Guardian network now included partnerships with legitimate museums, providing proper display for artifacts that could safely be made public while maintaining security for more sensitive pieces. Educational programs helped school children understand cultural heritage protection without revealing Guardian operations. Arthur's letter concluded with words that seemed to pulse with prophetic understanding. By the time you read this, new threats will have emerged, requiring solutions I cannot imagine. But you will be ready, not because of anything I taught you, but because Guardian work creates the strength necessary to meet each challenge. Trust your judgment, honor your responsibilities, and remember that true Guardians serve the future through protection of the past. The final paragraph contained Arthur's ultimate lesson. Guardianship is not inherited. It is earned through daily choices to place preservation above personal convenience. You have earned this responsibility, Daniel Cooper. Now teach others to earn theirs. As the memorial service concluded, Daniel carefully folded Arthur's letter and placed it in his jacket pocket next to Elena's Guardian badge. Both artifacts would remain with him as reminders of what true service meant and what he owed to those who would continue the Guardian mission after his own service ended. Walking away from Arthur's grave, Daniel understood that the old man's legacy was secure, not because his treasures were protected, but because the principles that motivated their protection had found new guardians committed to carrying them forward into an uncertain but hopeful future.